Welcome to Dysgraphia, a podcast for parents and teachers about the best way to support kids living with learning difficulties. My name's Michael Shanahan, and I'd like to acknowledge that we're recording today on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to this land, its waters, and its community. Today we have an episode about how to support kids for which standard intervention is too hard. And I'm joined today by Sally Andrew, who I've been working with for a number of years now, and I had the privilege of being trained by Sally when I learnt to be a dyslexia tutor, a specialist tutor. Sally, welcome. You've been on the podcast before, but would you like to give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Oh, sure, Michael. Yes, it's a while since you did your training, isn't it? So, yes, I've been working with children with dyslexia and other difficulties since around the year 2000. So I've seen a lot of children.
So that's 25 years.
Yeah,
Sally.
That's right. And before that, I was a junior primary teacher many eons ago. So I'm a bit of a dinosaur. And then along the way, I've been involved with training teachers, how to teach children with dyslexia. But the bulk of my work is in private practice. So you can imagine after 25 years, I've seen a lot of children and a lot of children who, ostensibly have the same issue. The vast majority of them have dyslexia, maybe dysgraphia. But they're not all the sausage shape, even within that. Within that, there's an absolute range of students who are very severe to students who are quite mild, students who are very young up to students who are older. So, we all work with core materials that we use, and they are fantastic. And, I'm so grateful when I started that there was a program to follow, which kept me on track. And I still use that program today. However, as you come along, you get to, say, teaching point 8 or teaching point 10 or whatever, and you're thinking, gosh, this isn't going very well for this particular student. So, what do? You are a teacher, you're resourceful, and you think, I've got to make something that will work for this student. So I guess what I like to do is try and problem solve and think, okay, how can I make this easier for this student if they're not getting it in the way that they should do at this particular point? Do I need to go much easier? Do I need to make it more advanced? So that's the way, I've been working for the last, few years, really, just adjusting things. And so you gather a bank of materials and start to share them around. Yeah,
and you've got a massive amount of experience and materials, and that's all very time consuming.
Sure
I'm sure teachers out there and educators understand how much time goes into planning individual lessons, and particularly when you have a student that doesn't, as you say, doesn't fit into the cookie cutter. They've got a problem that you've never seen before, or a difficulty where you just don't have a sheet that you can use or resources ready-made. You've got to make resources for that. And over the years, you build up a huge library of it and a huge body of experience. And so Sally and I got together about a year ago now.
That's right.
And talked about building a set of resources for exactly this purpose, like trying to pool our resources and our approaches from the kids that we've worked with that have found intervention particularly tricky for whatever reason. And we've pulled all of those resources and come up with a program called Literacy Support Kit, which is really designed as a set of resources to support kids for which standard intervention is too difficult. And so we have kids living with dyslexia that reach sticking points where things just get too hard and you've got to do a deep dive into a particular topic. But you also have kids that may be living with intellectual disability and, the program as built is just too difficult for them. It just takes them too far on each step, and you've got to take the program down to much more little fine grain steps. We have kids that may have fine motor control difficulties or dysgraphia,
sure do,
for which handwriting is a massive issue. And it can really affect the kid's progress because it's so difficult, to write a letter that, progress can get held up because it may take a long time to do that. So for a lot of kids, you have to kind of sometimes pause the standard intervention program and do a deep dive into a particular skill or get them up to speed on something that, is a kind of a prerequisite skill. So that's really what we've been working on for the last 12 months is how do you design a set of resources for teachers so that we're hoping it will save teachers and tutors the time and effort of having to create all of those extra resources themselves. Yes. We've pulled all the stuff that we've created over the years and put it all together, hopefully in a way that's really easy to understand and in a way that's easy to dip in and out of if you need it. So
that's right.
It's a program you can follow from start to finish if you like, or it's somewhere where you might get stuck on a particular letter or sound and you can dip into our program, use the resources there, get the kid up to the level where they're ready to continue on with the standard intervention again. Does that sound like a reasonable description of where we've been at?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think this is where it comes down to teacher knowledge and discretion. I know when I first started teaching, I just wanted to go from teacher point 1 to 2 to 3 and to 4. And, it's 5 next week, but we haven't really mastered 4. What am I going to do? And so on. And so, once you've got some, experience as a teacher, you start to realize, okay, well, we're not really ready for teaching point 5. What am I going to do about that?
Yeah.
So if you can then think, yes, I've got something else I can do. I like to say it's like the same dog washed. You keep bringing out the same material, but in a different format. That way you keep the student engaged, they're not really aware that they're reading the same words or writing the same letters. You're presenting the same material in another format, which can, just give them that extra practice they need.
Yeah, and give them the confidence that they feel like they're making progress and they're having success.
Yes.
Maybe if we do a bit of a look at the typical kinds of things we might see, the typical examples of where a standard intervention is too difficult for kids and the kind of resources we've got and the tips and the tricks that kind of we've come up with over the years as to how you might deal with it. I'm thinking, let's go back to the start and the alphabet. So, the alphabet's the building blocks of our language, isn't it?
Absolutely,
the building blocks of literacy. And I've often been really surprised by how many kids, even kids you might get them in year 5 or year 6, and they can't do the alphabet. They don't know the alphabet, or they're not, they know the alphabet song.
Yes.
But they don't actually know that corresponds to letters.
I think back to Alison Playford, who was a forerunner in all this, and she used to say she was going to get a dog and call it Elemenopy because, so many children think that Elemenopy is one letter. So, yes, it's quite enlightening, isn't it? When that first day your student comes, you get out your wooden letters and they think, like I say, do you know the alphabet? And they say, yes. And then you see them getting stuck.
That's right. Or you have the rainbow alphabet there that they've put out and they can say it, but then you remove 2 letters and get them to say it and they're completely lost because they've missed that one letter from that song. And so they don't really actually know the alphabet. They just know the alphabet song. And for some kids, it's even more difficult than that. A lot of kids can do the alphabet and they know the alphabet song, but some kids have absolutely no concept of an alphabet. And it would be too much to introduce the alphabet all at once, So this is an example of the kind of prerequisite knowledge. Most programs assume that you're coming or a kid is coming with some sort of knowledge of the alphabet and, the initial activity is to put the alphabet out. But what happens when a kid does not know the alphabet? I've had a couple of kids that don't know ABC, or beyond ABC.
And I think it would be quite scary is, the first day you get there and you've got letters in front of you. Yep. If you have no knowledge or no concept, then that's a big thing to ask them to do that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you might need to go back a step or 2 steps or 3 steps.
That's right. And behaviour is often a key to that. I can think of a few kids where right from the outset, because it really is the first thing you do, isn't it, with a kid, is say, do you know the alphabet, and get them to put it out. And I see a lot of, with the kids that find it really difficult, this is where you see the distracting behaviours come up, or, the anxiety, you can see it welling up in them because they just don't know it. And I think when you see hints of that, it's time to make it more simple. And so what are the strategies here? So let's say we've got a kid, they're fresh into the tutoring session and they clearly don't know the alphabet and they're stressed about it, and you can see that even if they don't tell you explicitly. How do we break that down and make it more simple for kids?
Yeah, working with very young children, I'm thinking of primarily, when they come in and, they might have been explained to them they're going to have some help with their reading. A lot of children, whether they're young or older, they come and they think you're going to get them to read a book. So that first activity has to be fun. It has to be engaging. It has to hold their interest, and it has to be doable for them.
Not too scary.
No, that's right. Not too scary. So if I've got a little one, maybe a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old, and I get that feeling, I will not even put wooden letters out. I'll give them a picture alphabet, because who doesn't like looking at pictures, and I say, this is the alphabet, we're going to put this out, so that can be a way in. And we have a number of different picture alphabets, where we're basically just wanting them to get the idea that our alphabet is made up of 26 letters, and every time we say a word, that first sound, that first sound of the, apple, boat, or whatever it is you use, is there. It's cueing their ear into the fact that, when we say a word, it's made up of sounds, phonemes.
So starting not with letters at all, but just with pictures.
Just with pictures.
And pictures of things that they would recognise, and they know the word for. Yeah. And you would do that, and they would slowly and it would be fun. Yeah, and it would build their confidence. Right. And then you could slowly introduce the fact that, hey, there's a letter.
That's right.
That matches up to this sound. This is what letters are. And for some kids, that's a revelation. That's right. That letters represent sounds.
Absolutely. And it's even more of a revelation a bit further on, when they not only have a sound, but they have a name.
Yes, that's right.
When you think about it, break down all the components of learning the alphabet, it's really pretty complex, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And so we've got that resource there of the picture alphabet. Another interim step that I've done with kids that find it tricky is, like, I work on a glass table so I can write on it with a texter. So before they come in, I write the alphabet out for them in the arc on the table. And so they don't have to remember it. They just match the letters up and they put it on top of the one that I've written. And that sounds very simple, doesn't it? But for some kids that's challenging, even just to recognise the letter shape and match it up. And, one kid in particular, I did that for probably 5-6 sessions before they got confident enough to say to me, I don't think I need them anymore. And for them, that was a big step. They were so proud that they didn't need me to write the alphabet on there. And they were like, no, I don't need that anymore. I can do this. And, they made a few errors, but it's comparing that to a kid that just struggles and kind of gives pushback. And you could see a kid like that would come to dread coming to a tutoring session because it's too hard.
Well, as I say, we consider the alphabet the easy part of the lesson. So if that's the easy part, what's coming next?
yeah, that's right.
So, yes, I think it's just that thinking, where's this student at that I'm working with today? And that sort of assessment, and really thinking that very first lesson, can I make this, an enjoyable activity? There's time for the more structured bit coming later, but initially you've just got to, as you say, Michael, if we don't build the relationship with the student from day one, you're going to be in all sorts of trouble later on.
Yeah, that's right. And, filling in the gaps for them until they build their confidence. I've worked with a kid that was selectively mute.
Oh, yes.
And so the alphabet, that was a big challenge. To come in and for me to say, okay, can you say the alphabet, when you first meet somebody. Yeah. And so it's about building some bridges for that. So, for a while, it was me that did the talking and me that did the alphabet. Yeah. And they were just pointing. You know what I mean? So we could bridge that gap until they built the confidence. And again, they build it to the point where they say, I can do it now. And so really what we're talking about is being able to use your experience and your kind of radar of, is this too hard for the kid? What can I do to simplify it? So that's what we've been working on, is trying to find, ideas and suggestions for how do you simplify these difficult things. So the alphabet, we've got the picture alphabet there, and we've got some suggested alternative activities for building up to being able to do an alphabet.
Yeah.
And then basically you would go, okay, you're at the point now where you have the prerequisite knowledge to go into a standard intervention.
Yes.
And now you're doing more complex alphabet work and remembering it and, flipping letters, that sort of stuff. So we start with the alphabet, and then we've got kids for which, so let's assume now, we've got a kid, maybe they know the alphabet, but the next very common difficulty is being able to put sounds together. So they may have a letter and a sound, like, they may know that I makes the it sound, but, you put 3 letters together, you put the word pip and they are all at sea.
That's right.
That is just too much to blend those 3 sounds together.
Yes.
And you find those kids still at the point of just sounding them out.
Correct.
When you ask them to read, they're actually just going p, ip instead, and they can't make that step.
That's
from
right.
Ip to pip.
Yeah.
Really common, isn't it? That's probably more common than the alphabet difficulty.
Yes.
So what do you do then?
Yes, and I think this is exhausting for students when they're at this stage. Imagine you might give them a simple reading sheet and it might have, say, 9 words with, pip, tip, tin, pin, just, 3-letter words on, and then a few sentences at the bottom. Well, if you've had to decode every single word, by phonemes, you're exhausted after about 5 words. So that's not working for that student, is it? So what do we want to do? We want to get them to at least be able to go p, ip, pip, t, ip, tip. So an onset and rhyme approach is what we're trying to build, gradually. So that's what we talk about a lot in our kids, is building a knowledge of chunks, whether it's at VC level, like ip and in and it, or whether it's at VCC level like an end and est and ent, and that's where, again, the teacher who's working with the student and knows their student well can say, yes, this student's, okay, they're reading this sheet, but is it smooth? Is it automatic? It really isn't. It's laboursome for this student. What can I do to make it easier? Because if you're eventually not very far wanting to get them to read 2-syllable words, and they're still having to put a lot of effort into reading 3 letters or 4 letters, that's going to be hard work for them, and you're going to lose those students.
Very hard work, and for them, very disheartening, because they are super aware that they can't read.
Yes.
Especially, if you look at it from the kids' perspective, they're fully aware they're going to a tutor because they have reading difficulties. And so if they are with a tutor and they still can't read, that's extra difficult for them, that they're not getting that success. And in a standard intervention program, you don't have much room there to explore that. Those initial letters are introduced at a reasonable pace. Generally you might do a new one each session. And for most kids, that's fine to progress at that speed, and they learn those letter sounds and they practice them, and then they can start putting those simple words together, pip, sit, that sort of stuff. But for many kids, that's just too hard. What you don't want to do then is keep introducing more and more and more
That's right.
letter sounds for them to learn, because now it's even harder, because now they're having to decode more letters, remember more sounds, but they still can't blend them together. And so this is where you might want to kind of pause the progress in that standard program and just focus, like you say, on learning chunks, chunk sounds.
Yeah, that's right.
So you move from just 1 letter sound to 2 letters together make this sound.
That's right. So, yeah, I mean, it takes about, I'm working with a little boy at the moment who's had a term and a bit of intervention with me, and he's at this level. And just to give you some idea, we've been at this level for the term, and it's only, maybe out of about half a dozen, 8 chunks he could, automatize. He's really only got 2 down pat at this stage, by the end of that teaching. He's getting better, and I know that this next term it will start to kick in. But just imagine, how hard that is for him.
Yeah, that's right.
He can read the words, but he's still going, it, pit,
Yes.
so not it, pit, except with a few exceptions. So he's needed a lot of this type of work. But he's happy to do it because, we've got games that do this, we've got writing sheets that do this. We've got all sorts of things that do this and very simplified reading sheets. So that's not too much print on the paper.
Yeah, so they feel that success. And so, really what you need to do at this stage, if your kid's at this stage, this is all about working memory, long-term memory, and really to kind of be able to blend those sounds together. They have to have that sound firmly in their long-term memory. So they're not using up that brain power to decode the letter as they're going. This is why it's going so slowly, because they're having to stop and think, what is that sound?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's p. That's it. That's p.
Yes.
And then you can't then just hold all 3 in your working memory and blend it together. So you've got to get these sounds into your long-term memory so that it just happens automatically.
Yeah.
And to do that, there's no way around it. The only way to do it is practice.
That's right.
But if you're with a kid, 6 years old, 7 years old, and often living with ADHD or, other difficulties, that's challenging to get them to do that practice because it can be very repetitive and boring. So what we've done in the literacy support kit, as you've said, Sally, is provide a whole bunch of activities that are all practicing those same chunks of sounds in a variety of different ways that are fun and challenging. So the kid gets those multiple repetitions. And we're talking about kids needing hundreds of repetitions to automate, that it is, this letter I is making the it sound, or this letter P is making the P sound. Hundreds.
Yes.
And that would be really boring if you just did it repetitively over and over like that. So what are some of the activities we've got on the sheets?
Well, going from top down, we have the reading sheets. So, and we have reading sheets at 2 levels at this stage. So we put blue level, which is CVC level. And then we've got the green level, slightly harder. So you typically 4-letter words, which will either have a blend at the beginning, like sp in spin, or blend at the end, like nt in tent. And I find that's a sticking point. Some children are good with blends at the beginning, but not blends at the end. So we put that differentiation in for that. So we've got that going on. We have got a game, Chunky Pig.
Oh, yes, Chunky Pig. Kids love Chunky Pig.
Really good. So you just get a lot of practice in saying those chunks, don't you?
Yeah.
What else have we got, Michael? We've got
Make a Chunk,
Make a
which
Chunk.
combines
Yes,
handwriting.
that's right.
And so it's about, having not words at the top of the page, but chunks. And so kids get these automatized. And so when they see IP, they start slowly reading IP instead of saying IP.
Yes, that's right.
After a lot of repetitions, for them, this automatically becomes IP for them. And so there's a make a chunk sheet where it's matching up the I and the P, drawing a line and then writing IP. So we've got handwriting component of that as well, which we'll talk about. We've got tracking sheets.
Oh, yes, we have. We've got tracking sheets, and I find that's a really good activity for kids. So, they just have to find all the words with IP in, tip, pip, out of a line of words. Not only track them, they then write them. So this idea of getting it in the hand is really good for kids to store in their memory. So, and then that can be a timed reading exercise at the end. Coming up with a variety of reading sheets is difficult, when you've only got a limited number of letters that you can use. So we've also got closed sheets in there. So again, they're reading the same sorts of words, but they're having to select a word to put in the gap.
Yeah. What's a closed sheet?
A closed sheet is where you've got a missing word, so it appears in and you've got a picture of a tin or whatever, and they have to find the correct word from a list of words at the top.
So the idea is we have a whole lot of repetition, built-in activities that kids really enjoy doing, and they don't know. It's kind of practice by subterfuge until we start getting those chunks automated, and then we can move on.
That's great.
And you really see the change in the kids when they start reading, being able to say ip or sp instead of sp. Being able to merge blends together like that really helps with their reading. So that's a major step for them. We were talking about handwriting before.
Yeah, I think we've got to go there, Michael.
Yeah, I think it's a big one, isn't it?
Such a big thing, sadly, we don't see children at the very start of their school journey, So they often come to us by, they might be 7 or 8. Sometimes we get them younger, by which time, handwriting patterns or shapes or letter formation has become quite stuck, and if it's good, that's fine. But if it's not, it's very difficult to undo, So we've got to look at it. That's for
kids that we will write.
That's right. That's for the kids, right. So, I suppose going from the top down, we like to teach kids in cursive, so if they haven't learned cursive at school, that's a great way in, because you can revisit handwriting. You can teach them about doing an approach stroke and an exit stroke. But this all needs to be specifically taught, and even, tricky letters like linking an R to any letter really. R is a tricky one to link. So we've broken all of that down, for kids who are at that level. But we've gone further back than that, haven't we, Michael?
Yeah, we have. Because and really this for me, this is close to my heart because I live with dysgraphia, and I've always found handwriting very difficult. It doesn't help that I have a rare genetic mutation, brachydactyly it's called, and I've got tiny little fingers. And I think, it's only actually in hindsight that I think that actually might have contributed quite a bit to my difficulty with handwriting. And I also lost a third of my thumb on my writing hand in an accident. And so, for the handwriting, there may be physical reasons why handwriting is difficult. So it is actually quite complicated because not only is it a lot of cognitive load to do the handwriting, but there's this fine motor control, fine motor skill component to it that's quite difficult. And really is like a physical skill that you have to learn, like learning to throw a ball or learning to catch. If you take literacy out of it, the building blocks are, can you hold a pencil or a pen in a way that's going to be efficient enough? And, I'd say 90% of kids I see don't have a reasonable pencil grip. And it's very difficult for them.
That's right. And I think, I'm hoping writing's making a comeback. I've gone from, way back as a junior primary teacher, working in a school where the principal, it was her thing, so it was very much a focus, but in days where the curriculum wasn't as crowded as it is now. So I do appreciate teachers have a lot to get into their kids, but, watching that and knowing it can be good. And what is it about it being good? Is so it helps the kids, at the end of the day. If you get to about grade 3 or 4 and you know your handwriting's rubbish, you don't want to write. So then, you probably don't like spelling either. You don't like doing any form of writing. And we've got this whole area which is very hard for children, and it's going to restrict their progress. It's
very public.
It is public.
It's like you're having guests over to the house, you want to tidy it up.
I knew I should have done that.
And make sure it looks good.
Yeah.
But you can't tidy your handwriting up. You know what I mean? Because I remember this. I remember the dread of handing my book to the teacher because it looked terrible.
Yes.
And, it doesn't, not that I'm concerned about grades when I'm working with kids, but it does affect kids' grades. And unfortunately, therefore, their self-esteem and their self-worth. It's a really big one that, is overlooked. And you see the flip side of it when kids do become good writers and they develop a real pride. I've seen a number of kids turn the corner from not wanting to write to then actually wanting to improve because they can see that they can do it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes with kids, they are very reluctant to write for all those reasons because it's very exposing. And so we've got suggestions for activities where, we take them even to pre-writing activities. I've worked with a few kids, but one kid in particular I'm thinking refused to write anything because they so much lacked confidence. And so we started with erasing, where I would do the writing on the whiteboard and I put like a little, piece of cloth on the end of their texter. So all they would do was erase what I wrote. And they were
such a great idea,
They
Michael.
were fine with that because they weren't exposing themselves, their untidiness. They were just getting rid of mine. And so we practiced a whole lot of letter strokes. I wasn't telling them that's what we were doing, but, we were able to automate a whole bunch of stuff. And then eventually it got to the point where they asked if they could have a go and me erase it, and inside I'm going, yeah, we got there, because they've taken that step now, that now they feel that confidence. And then you can work from there to handwriting. But for a kid like that, there would be a few steps in between before you'd get them to write an actual letter because you don't want to crush that confidence.
No.
And so there are a whole lot of pre-writing shapes, that are very common. And it's quite an efficient way to learn handwriting, to learn these common shapes as a beginning, because the alphabet's actually fairly uniform. There's probably, I don't know, I haven't counted them, maybe 15, 20 different strokes that you need to do to form all the letters. So starting just with partial letters. So we've got, a bunch of worksheets where you're just working on the start of a letter, both cursive and print. And then when you've built confidence with that, then you move on to the next part and then you can put it all together and form your first letter, which is a really proud moment for many kids. But again, this is about repetition. And so here's the problem, isn't it? How do you get the kids' confidence? How do you build the kids' confidence when they may have to do a whole term just in pre-writing activities and they can see they're not making progress. So this is all about how do you maintain that balance, of making progress but being able to address, sometimes really significant issues.
I think this is one of those areas which it's a real team event, because students come to us typically for 45 minutes or an hour, and that's a very short time. And I know, from being a dinosaur where, kids used to have to write their name every single day and then trace it and then write it again. We don't have the time, I don't think, to do that in school on a regular basis. But can we get the parents involved here? Can we say, do this at home? Can you, because there's typically some letters which are sticking points for kids, and what we try to do if they haven't learned to form it correctly is get that confidence, so some letters are more tricky than others, get that confidence with any letters that are difficult by practicing each part of the stroke. If there's letters that are formed incorrectly, so, I've got a student who likes to start his N at the end and go backwards, and it's an ingrained habit. So we all have to be saying, no.
and you get real pushback for that too.
That's right.
They don't want to change the way they're doing it.
We can provide materials, but as you keep saying, it's repeated practice, to iron out those difficulties or to teach them well from the start.
And even those pre-writing activities. So, I mean, we've got a set of sheets in there which is a chunk maze, and so it's just a bunch of mazes and some chunks written up the top, and these are all like to a structure. And literally all the kid needs to do is draw a line, solve the maze, through the maze, join one letter to the other and then read it. It might be it, might be it. But this is about that fine motor control. And so this is really them practicing not touching the lines. You're not allowed to touch the lines or we rub it out and they start again. So it's about that fine motor control of being able to make it through the maze. And so they're actually in a lesson actually spending a fair bit of time focusing on that pencil grip, fine motor control without the baggage of I'm learning to write a letter or, this is too hard. It's more of a fun activity, and it sounds small, just to solve a maze. But for many kids, this is what they need, just that practice at that pencil control, fine motor control, and instant feedback about whether they're gripping too hard or they're pressing too hard. Kids get anxious and they press too hard on the paper, and it gets, you've seen it, the pencil slightly gets stuck and then it gives way and they do a sudden big line and it goes over, it's just so difficult for them. It's a real balancing act.
Oh, absolutely. And I think while we're talking about handwriting, we also need to talk about, once you're starting to master the actual shape, then you've got to get it on the paper consistently the same size, and spacing and all of that. So we have provided trammed lines. We provided just sheets with just a few letters to practice at a time, haven't we?
Yeah, ground, grass, sky.
Yes, that's right. Getting kids, because some kids have no concept of that, particularly the ones with dysgraphia. They really don't see that at all. So again, it all needs to be explicitly taught and practiced relentlessly.
Yeah, that's right. And for me, a lot of it is about reducing the anxiety around it. Because we know that if a kid's anxious, for many kids, working memory is an issue and, makes things quite difficult. And as soon as you have any level of anxiety, your working memory is diminished. And so I try and get kids into the habit of associating handwriting with being relaxed.
Yeah.
So I have a whole routine I do with them where they don't write until they're feeling relaxed and calm and focused. And if they're rushing, I slow them down and I just take a pause and just say, let's just stop for a minute.
Yeah.
Have a little breath. There's no rush. Yeah. Everything's fine.
Oh, I'd like
you
to be your student,
You don't have to
worry.
Let's just try and do the start of this one again and see if you can make it up to the line without going over the line. Let's do that again. So it's just that nice, calm, relaxing. I want them to get that association of handwriting could be a pleasant thing. There's a sheet. So this is actually in the Playbury intervention. When you learn a new letter, you write it multiple times. T is T, T is T, and you write it over and over again. I kind of get those kids to see that as a little meditation. Say, hey, this is the beautiful part of the lesson. You get to relax. There's no pressure. You take your time and just write this. So it's always about trying to get that calmness. Maybe that's come from my personal experience, because I can tell you if I've got to write in front of somebody, I'm instantly anxious, which makes my spelling go out the window as well. The whole thing is unpleasant. And so, right. It's you could do, and I have done this with kids, for a whole year, the main focus is being that handwriting, because for many kids, that's a big hurdle. Of course, it's not all you do, but the main focus is, taking time to really get that handwriting, because you see it build their confidence when they start to master it.
Yes, that's right. And if the first mark they make is a bad one, then they don't want to go any further, and it actually gets worse, doesn't it? So, a little and often is the way forward, I think. Yeah, we often see that perfectionism, don't we? Where kids are so prone to making errors, they become very frightened of making errors, and they're very harsh and judgmental on their own work. I have kind of compulsive erasers, kids who will write a letter and they'll self-correct Yeah.
And you just see a spiral of anxiety building. No, that's wrong, and they rub it out. And each time it's getting more and more stressed.
There's a hole about to develop in the paper.
And so, it's about, modeling for them and teaching them that, hey, this is fine. It's fine. Doesn't matter if it goes a little bit over the line.
Yeah.
We can do it again. And, having a book, they work in a workbook with me. Yeah. And often when we're at that point, if I've had them long enough, I'll just take a break and we'll go back in the book to when they first started and say, have a look at how much you've improved since we started. This isn't about getting it perfect today. No. It's just about practice.
Yeah.
Each time you do it, it's a little bit better. Every now and then you'll make a mistake. It's okay.
That's great.
That being reassuring like that, I think, is what kids need.
Yes, that's right.
And giving them the time. So this would never be possible in a school environment.
No.
You couldn't do that with a kid in a class with 30 other kids.
No,
you know what I mean?
Not.
And so you can see how a kid left to their own devices in one of those kind of anxiety spirals, that would be quite difficult for them. And if that's gone on for years, well, by the time they get to us, they do really have a psychological issue with it, don't they?
Yeah.
By the time they get to us, they're really, it is something really difficult for them, and it's hard to break through that anxiety.
Yeah, and avoidance.
Yeah. And as we know, handwriting is a huge part of literacy. So there is a lot of research that shows that handwriting really improves literacy outcomes. And as you always taught me, Sally, right from when I first known you, this idea of getting it in the hand.
Yes.
It can't just be talking about it, can it?
No, that's right. It's what helps to make the learning secure. I just recently saw a guy at a cafe actually handwriting some notes, young guy, and I said, it's so good to see somebody handwriting and not on their PC. And he said, you know what? He said, it's the only way I get, something I'm learning to stick. And that's so true, I think most people, some people I'm sure will disagree with me, but that getting it in the hand and that focus is what helps with that learning to become secure.
Yeah, there is a lot of research to show that that's true. Handwriting notes leads to much better retention than typing them. Even if university students taking lecture notes, if they handwrite them, they're much more likely to retain them and remember them.
So handwriting might be making a comeback.
Hopefully. Okay, so we've got alphabet, difficulties with the alphabet, and a whole bunch of stuff, ideas, activities, that sort of thing to bridge that gap for kids. We've got those initial tricky blends, where you're making those very short, consonant, vowel, consonant words with that short vowel sound.
Yeah.
And then we've got the handwriting. So this is already a big bunch of stuff, isn't it, that we're expecting kids to do. We still want them to make progress. And for many kids, introducing, if we then move to introducing spelling rules or introducing long vowel sounds or two-syllable words, it's too much. So for many kids, this kind of, the progress is slow and very hard work. And the problem with many, this isn't a problem, this isn't a criticism of the programs, it's just that they're not quite built for the kind of kids we're talking about that really struggle. Once you get into multi-syllable words, that is a bridge too far for many kids, and it becomes a sticking point and a source of frustration, and then a source of a lack of confidence for kids. So what we've done with the program is just start with the short vowels.
Yes, that's right.
Do you want to talk about that, like the sequence of the program that caters for kids that find it too difficult?
Yes, that's right. Because typically, in a lot of intervention programs, we come up to this idea of open and closed syllables, long vowels, short vowels, and it can just be a bit too fast and far for some students. So that's why we decided, look, let's focus on these kids who are finding this really difficult, So that's why we start with the short vowel sounds in the first part of the program, but certainly one-syllable words. So no syllable division in the literacy support kit. And and keep them, so if they're really not ready to go back into standard intervention for a long time, what are you going to do? I worked with a student who had an intellectual disability, and it was a long time before I could move him towards 2-syllable words. But, even with all the resources we've got, I wanted him to feel like he was moving forward all the time. And so we just kept on adding more and more phonemes into his deck,
Yep.
And so that's what we've done here. However, we have addressed the issue that, for this kid and a lot of kids, a way into reading 2-syllable words is to bolt on a suffix.
Yes. That
is a lot easier than actually sort of manually, working out whether it's picnic and it's divides in the middle, or robot and it divides after a long go. So some children, that's a better way in for them, reading a 1-syllable word and bolting on a suffix, So we teach suffix S at after about 30 teaching points, I think, formally. However, there's no reason you as the teacher can say, look, I'm going to teach about suffix S now. Even with my little kids who are reading 3-letter words, they might be able to read pins, but pin and put an S on and make it pins. And you can show them that this is an extra little bit that's stuck onto a word, which change. Yep. Even if you don't want to go into teaching what it's doing, you might or you might not. That's up to you. And
most kids can handle it.
Yeah, most kids can.
Yeah, most kids understand that
that's
suffix
right,
S makes more than one.
More than one and alters a verb. But you might not want to do that formal teaching there. You might, but we're not restricting you. But we've provided some morphology sheets here at intervals where you can read a 1-syllable word and then add on a suffix to it to make it a little bit harder. So we've got those at 3 levels actually for kids.
Mm. Yeah. So the idea behind the literacy support kit is to keep kids progressing.
That's right. Yeah.
So that they can keep moving through, or if they are stuck at a particular teaching point, for example, in standard intervention in the Playbury program that we use, reasonably early on we start talking about C and K and the CK rule, K before E, I or Y, CK after a short vowel at the end of a 1-syllable word. That's really complicated. And for many kids that becomes a bit of a sticking point. For a number of weeks it could become a sticking point. There are some kids that I work with where I think that's just too soon for them to be, would be way too much for them to, too much cognitive overload because they're still just struggling to become automatic with the standard letter sounds. And so the sequence cuts out that more complicated component.
Yes.
So they can keep progressing, learning new letters, learning new sounds and new phonemes. But it's also designed for you to dip in and out of it if you need to.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you're stuck at that particular teaching point in standard intervention, well, there's a whole bunch of resources there ready-made for you to have revision and kind of keep working, have a whole bunch of resources there for you. So you could stick on a particular teaching point for a number of weeks, but not have to make a whole bunch of new resources for the kids.
Yes, that's right. And, this is, again, I keep saying it comes back to teacher knowledge. So I think to a young girl I've had for a number of years now, a lot of the work that we put into the literacy support kit was for her. Yeah. So, there was no way she could go through the standard intervention. And so we actually covered pretty well A to Z, I think, over about an 18-month period of time before I put her back in and went back filling in the gaps. Then I went back to teach her open and closed syllables, syllable division, and now she's going along well. She's still one of those kids with more severe dyslexia, but she needed that length of time at that, just working with a simplified program, and so that's what we did, and. By the time we went back, we were still working with that A to Z, but we were just giving her lots of practice then on open syllables, closed syllables, syllable division and so on. But it was really important for her to feel that she kept moving each week and she was getting a new reading sheet each week. So, there were a lot of personalised reading sheets going out I put her name in them and so on, to make it, make her feel like she's achieving something. You know?
And the card deck gets bigger.
Yes, the card
they're
deck
learning
got
more
bigger.
stuff, so they feel
That's right.
like they're getting that progress.
That's right.
And I think the reason that works is because you need all that extra repetition. You need all that time to make those letter sound associations automatic. And once that's automatic enough, like once that's in the long-term memory and doesn't take too much processing to retrieve it, well, then you've got the cognitive space to go back and learn syllable division, open and closed syllables. Yeah. But you're not getting stuck.
No,
that's right. And I think that's what really we wanted to address is, kids that kind of get stuck at teaching point 10, teaching point 12, where it starts to get a bit more tricky.
Yes, that's right.
And you're kind of thinking, we've been here for nearly a term now and we haven't moved on.
That's right.
And that's really tricky when you're in that situation. It's tricky for everyone.
Yes, that's right. And you really don't feel that you're using your time productively.
Yeah, and a lot of this comes from that, doesn't it? Being a private tutor, I'm always hyper aware that people are getting their money's worth. I mean, of course it's about the kid, but there's an element there of, look, I don't want someone to pay for a session that isn't productive. No. I feel a lot of pressure there to perform and, help the kid move on and make progress, because otherwise, why is someone paying the money and coming to me? Right. And so to do that, you really do have to customize and personalize the approach, to match the individual, which is a lot of work.
It is a lot.
And recognizing that's a lot of work, that's why we thought the literacy support kit would be useful for other people, because we've done a lot of that hard work and produced those resources, and they're there for people to use. And we've made it part of the word cracking subscription.
Yes, that's
and
right.
So previously, when you got a word cracking membership, it would be for the word cracking software and all of the morphology resources. But now we've combined the two. So the new membership, you get all of the word cracking software, all of the morphology resources. You get the word cracking training course for free included in your membership. Plus you get access to all of the resources of the literacy support kit. And we're building them all the time.
Yes, I was going to say,
I've
this
got
isn't
about
the
40
end.
more sheets that I'm going to add this week.
That's right. That's right. It's always going to be growing, because we'll always get new kids and think, what am I going to do with this one? Need something slightly different.
Yeah. And it's very satisfying for me, because now I'm not just making those new resources and sheets for one kid. I'm able to...
You're spreading the love.
Yeah, that's right. And put them on the website for other people to use.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about alphabet. We've talked about blending sounds and getting kids using chunks as that interim step. We've talked about avoiding, if necessary, those difficult spelling rules, grammar and that sort of stuff that kids can get stuck on, and being able to go from A to Z, with all of those basic phonemes, so kids feel like not feel like, but they are actually making progress. And as far as handwriting goes, they're actually learning to write all of those letters as well as they're progressing. But there's also, we've talked about chunks, but there's also the idea of high frequency words, which people are probably familiar with. And these are words that kids are going to be coming across a lot. That's why they're called high frequency words. So it's really efficient from a teaching perspective to learn those words, because they're words that they're going to come across a lot. So it's good bang for buck.
Yes, and don't they cause so much trouble for children?
Yeah, they do, because often schools have their word tests every week, which is very stressful.
Yeah, I mean, they're hard for them for reading, and they're hard for them for spelling, you know. So for that reason, in the blue level, and this is why our sentences for reading are quite short, and, you have a little, there's a few things you can't say because you're stuck with words, but we've kept them to a minimum in that level, and really just put in the ones that we feel they have to know. But the green level introduces some more. So I'm talking about words like come and there and so on, which are not phonetically easy for our kids. And so we've got those. We've got some suggestions on, there's plenty of material out there about how you can learn high frequency words, but I would suggest at least building a pack of them to include in your student pack for repetition. But then we provided a couple of activities. So we've got high frequency word sheets. So the high frequency words, there's 1 or 2 on a page, and they're incorporated in a sentence. You might say something like, come here with me, but the come is in dots. So the student traces over the come. And then they could be used like that for tracing, or the teacher could decide to use them for dictation, and then they've got a word search with those words. And then we've got snakes and ladders, which is also for high frequency words. So, they're hard words for kids. Yeah. And, again, we just try and put more activities in.
It's about that. Lots of activities to get lots of repetition.
Yes, that's right.
And not get bored and frustrated by it, to try and make it enjoyable.
That's right.
And, repetition by subterfuge. And kids, they do like the game. They do like it.
Yes.
Like they genuinely enjoy the variety of activities.
Yeah.
It's really handy as a tutor to be able to go to the site and, quickly download 5 sheets that give me options. I might not even use them all in a session, but at least I know that I can see a kid's getting restless or is fed up. I can swap activities quite quickly without having to, make more and more and more resources every time I teach. I think probably the only other thing we haven't spoken about, I think because we're kind of assuming people might know what we're talking about, is the deck. You mentioned deck then. But each time a child is taught a new letter and the sound and how to write it, they get a card. And then that card is practiced hopefully every day. Or, as often as possible, the kid goes through the deck and, we do it as a reading exercise. So you show them the card and they say, it is I. Or they might have a clue word for it as we do in Playbury. So they might say igloo it.
Yeah.
So we've produced, a downloadable, printable set of cards that can be used for that, with the basic sounds that are covered in the Literacy Support Kit program. And there's also the spelling drills that are done each week where it's the opposite to that.
That's correct.
They're not reading the letter, but you say, okay, how do you spell it? And they write an it and they say, it is I. And we've got an extra level of support in those sheets as well. So that's often very challenging for kids, particularly if they're struggling with handwriting, because that's a lot.
Yes.
That's a lot of cognitive load to go, it is I, do that in their head, and then write the letter down. And so there's a little interim step there where, up to a certain teaching point, because usually after that they're okay, we've got spelling sheets there where the letters are there to trace for the kids. So there's just that little bit of extra support when they're doing that spelling drill in case they've forgotten how to write them, and then a little space underneath for them to write them themselves because they need to do that. Tracing's not enough. They need to actually form the letter themselves. But they're there as a prompt for the kids so they remember how it's written if they need that support. And then, some more options for activities there for, checklists so they can check if they stayed on the lines. Or, you can customize that for whatever your kid may be struggling with, to have a focus for those sheets. So we hadn't mentioned those because they're kind of an assumed part of any program, aren't they, that you do that constant repetition and make those cards. And so, we've got downloadable and printable templates for those cards as well. It's so great to have your experience, Sally.
And your expertise, Michael.
Because, how you can't get that, can you? And I'm not saying this to, as anything other than a fact that when you've been doing this for as long as you have, it's really the only way to learn, isn't it? Like you have seen a lot of kids.
I know. I dread to think how many times I've heard the decks.
Yeah.
But yes, it is. And, I'm so thankful that I've had such a variety of kids, because, every year, and I suppose that's why I'm still in the game, I learn something, and hopefully I learn to be a better teacher, know. But they teach you so much, these children.
They do.
And, we're starting a new school year here in Australia, and there'll be a whole set of new challenges coming, and so we'll be putting our thinking caps on and think, okay, what does this kid need? You know, but you know, they might not need the whole literacy support kit. You know, they might just need a bit of it. You know,
that's right.
For a few weeks or just now and again. You know, but the beauty of it is you can dip in and out of it. But for some kids, you might just put them on it at the beginning, and they might need that, you know.
Yep.
So,
and I think it's simple enough that a parent could use it.
Yes, that's right.
So, you know, one of the things about the, you know, programs like Papery and others is that it does get very complicated, doesn't it? When you're talking about morphology, spelling rules, opening, you know, syllable types, it's probably beyond a parent, you know, who hasn't had training.
Yes.
But when we're sticking to a simple routine like the literacy support kit has, it's probably much more achievable for a parent to be able to follow a program like that.
Yes, I think, and it's somewhere you can get started, even if your child's not started school yet.
That's right.
You can download a picture alphabet and start with them there, get them ready, you know. And if it's, you know, if they're older and they're, you know, your teacher saying, oh, they're having trouble with this, there might be something in there that you could help with, maybe handwriting, whatever. So, it's we try to put it in a way that can help all sorts of people, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sally.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
And I loved what you said about it's the most difficult students are the ones that make you a better teacher, aren't they?
Yeah,
because you really have to reassess what it is you're doing and really think closely about, okay. And they come along quite often, don't they?
No, you know,
isn't it amazing?
I think it is stunning, actually, that, you know, that you come across such a variety of people in this world and children in this world who just push your boundaries sometimes, but you just say, okay, you're coming to me, we're going to get through this somehow. Yeah. And we're going to find a way, hopefully, that makes it pleasurable for both of us.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know?
Yep. They're amazing little kids, aren't they? And they find it so hard.
Yes.
Yep. So hard. It's so good to have a set of resources that gives them, you know, easy success, no matter what kind of level they're at. You know, they need to get that success, or it just ends up with frustration and them thinking they're stupid and, you know, that horrible spiral that we see too often. I don't want to end on a negative note. Yeah, so I hope that's been useful for everybody. Thank you for listening. You can visit our website and we'll have all the things we've talked about in the website on the show notes. You can visit wordcracking.xyz, which is where the literacy support kit lives. And as I mentioned, all the subscriptions there now include the literacy support kit. There's individual subscriptions and school subscription. We didn't really talk about the word cracker much today.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, but that fits in with the literacy support kit. And as you mentioned, Sally, we've got the morphology sheets and component to the literacy support kit because it does make it easier for a lot of kids.
I think that's another discussion for another day, Michael.
I think so. You know. So thank you everyone for listening. If you've got any questions or comments, we're always happy to answer and we love hearing from you. See you next time. Thanks, Sally.
See you next time. Thank you, Michael.